So welcome everyone. This is just a sharing of our for our group meeting as we come together each morning. So Annalie asked me to maybe talk about, because it is coming up to Easter. Oh, it's actually Easter Friday today, isn't it? Talking about the resurrection and the crucifixion. And I was also talking to Cate this morning about the self-concept. And she's sort of been like getting lots of teachings, little sharings. Really, it's been really good to just share with her. And from things I've said to her before I come on the group, it sort of spurs me into to elaborate a little bit on that. So the crucifixion of God's Son is when we crucify our brother, which is God's Son, when we judge him. And we crucify ourselves when we judge ourselves. The resurrection is when we have no judgments and we live. So resurrection is about living, and crucifixion is about death. Death is when we think with dead thoughts. The dead thoughts are when we judge others. And we can feel that when we judge someone, and we may speak that out, or we just live in those judgment thoughts of others or ourselves, we don't live. There's no living. In fact, it brings sickness, depression, anxiety, fatigue, all those things. They're all judgments. We're living in a judging mind, which is crucifixion. We're dying, or we're dead. So we've got to remember that the crucifixion and the resurrection are symbols. They're symbols of this teaching. They're pointers. So resurrection is life. It's living. It's freedom. It's clarity. It's full of energy. It's life. It's limitless. It's spacious. It's free. And it's a mind that is just in love with everything. It just sees holiness. It's a resurrected mind. And a crucified mind is one that's being nailed to the cross with its judgments. It's all the nails that are going in are the judgments that nail us to a cross of sadness, fatigue, anger, resentment, frustration. So these nails are the judgments that we believe, and they just really nail us to a cross. We're suffering, we're dead, we feel hopeless. So when Jesus says, be of good cheer, I have overcome the world, he means that I've overcome the world of death, which is that dead, crucified thoughts. His resurrection is his mind overcame the world of illusion. It overcame even all the ego's laws. So the ego is the laws of our mind that believes in certain things about the body. The ego convinces us that the body has autonomy to get sick. It says, hey, sickness just happened, and it just happened to me. I just spontaneously got sick. And Jesus says, no, sickness is not, it's impossible. You decided to have sickness. You may not even be aware of your decision for sickness, but he tells us that we always decided that it was safe to be little and sick than to be in our true self. He says that we're very scared of the limitless love that we are. So it's much more comfortable to be little, to just feel that small self that I can just tell everyone I'm just this small self that is little and sick and a defect of the world. And I feel safe in that. I feel, because I know it. I know that feeling of littleness, and I know that feeling of sickness, and I know it feels familiar, and I don't want to have to go to something that I'm unfamiliar with. I don't want to go towards the light because I'm scared of it. I'm scared that that light might ask me to do something. So we're choosing, he tells us we're choosing the littleness, believing it's safety, believing that, you know, he says that sickness is a defense against the truth. And he says, in my defensiveness, my safety lies. So he uses the word defense in both those teachings, both those lessons. So when we think about when we're sick, we think...
In my defensiveness, my safety lies.
Oh, sorry, defenselessness. Sorry. I don't want to get that teaching wrong. So one of the things we have to really look at is honestly why we choose sickness and littleness. Why are we choosing it? And we have to not to judge ourselves, but to become aware of why we think it's safe to be sick and little. So even if you've just got anxiety or depression or anything like that, we are choosing it, but we're just choosing it wrongly. That's all, because we're mistakenly thinking that safety lies there. And we're too scared of Jesus's teachings that safety lies in just being our whole, perfect, true self that we are. Because the ego says that if you live in a whole, true, perfect self, that you'll be called to do, and you give your self over to God or the Holy Spirit to direct, and you listen in for his guidance in every moment. The ego says that would be terrible. You wouldn't have free will. But if you read after Rules for Decision, there's just as he gives us the rules and the restorative, there's a little bit of the ending of that section clearly tells us that we have no free will. Well, nobody has free will at all. You are thinking with the ego all day long, and the only freedom you have is the choice to choose the Holy Spirit. So this idea that I have free will to go or do or choose anything, if you had free will, you would choose your thoughts. But as you can see, that all day long, thoughts think you. They think us. They come in, we believe them, and then we get affected by them. All day long, we're at the effect of the thoughts that think us. They're not our thoughts. And we think that when we get that thought and we react to it, that's free will. We think, oh, I've got all this free will. I'm free. But we're not. We're so mistaken. We're under the tyranny of a thought system. And our only freedom is to choose against it by asking the Holy Spirit to choose for God for me. So it's really important to contemplate that that these are not my thoughts. If they were your thoughts, you would know what your thoughts would be. You cannot know your next thought. You cannot know what thought is going to come in, and therefore it proves that they're not your thoughts. Because if they were your thoughts, you would know what was coming next. So we have to see that every single thought we think is either the ego or the Holy Spirit, and we're in the ego. So we're crucifying. We are unconsciously not even aware that we're crucifying ourselves every time we believe that ego thought. And the resurrection of our mind is through thinking with the thoughts that love us. The Holy Spirit is, you could say, another thought system. As we do the lessons, all the lessons are the thoughts that love us. They're all the loving thoughts. And it's important to do the lessons because those lessons form our new thought system. They're all going to blend together to become a thought system that comes in as a holographic thought system that complements each other. You're going to see, you're going to live in it. It's like you cannot know what the mind of God feels like when you're in the ego. You can think about it, can think, what could it be like to be an unawakened, clear mind? But you can't know it. You can see others that are in it. So when you're under the tyranny of the ego, we're being crucified, and the ego creates a self-concept. That's what it does. Each belief, each thought is what it does. Each ego thought hides something that we miss in the thoughts. When we think with the ego, we miss this idea that when it says, well, say you have a thought, an ego thought, I am useless. What it does is that thought, when it's believed, it brings a feeling with it of, hopelessness. It just brings heaviness and fatigue, and these feelings go along with believing that thought. But what it hides in that thought, it hides the fact that there's a self to be useless. It always hides this idea that there's this separate self to be useless. So when we believe that I am useless, it props up this idea that there's a separate self to be useless. There's a separate self that needs to do something. There's a separate self that is unworthy. So we have to chip away to start with that the feeling, the idea that I'm useless and worthless. But what it hides underneath is this illusory self, separate self that is never here. And that's why all spiritual teachings always point to the fact that this separate self is an illusion. And that's what the ego thoughts do. They make an idea. They make you believe, when you believe the thought, I am useless, you don't even know that the separate self is being created by that belief. Because without an idea that there's a separate self, there's nothing to be useless or unworthy. So there's no separate self to be happy or bound. There's no separate self to do anything or have anything or be anything. The separate self is the illusion. But that is like the final realization and seeing of that this separate self is a whole illusion held together by my belief that this self is something, whether it's unworthy or not good enough or whatever. But it's always about this separate self that is something. It's useless. It's hopeless. It's good. It's bad. But you're always talking about something that's not real. But it's this unreal separate self comes into being by the thoughts believed about it. So if I believe my body is too fat or too thin, it's a body, really, it's just a bit of flesh. It's a bit of bone, it's some eyeballs. It's, in fact, the truth is it doesn't even exist at all. It's believed into existence. But the concept of a self, it's all based on concepts and beliefs. A concept is that I'm not good enough, I'm not enough, I'm not doing enough. And so the painful egoic thoughts believed, initially they have to be replaced by I am blessed, I am loving, I am the Son of God, and they counteract and correct the incorrect ego thoughts that say I am worthless, I am guilty, I am hopeless, I am a waste of space, I should be doing something else, I this, I that. All those egoic thoughts have to get undone through forgiveness. They get undone here. So the first part of the awakening is to undo these thoughts, but what they're really undoing is the separate self, because the separate self is nothing. It is made up of concepts and beliefs about something. So I was saying to Cate, a really good analogy is to imagine that there's a little robot that we make. And so we create a little robot, and we might even put some flesh on it. They can grow flesh now. And say we were to stick some flesh all over this robot, and it doesn't have a self, it doesn't know anything, it's free of a self-concept. And we start programming it in, and we say, oh, we're going to give you these programmed thoughts, and we're going to press play, and it's going to say, I am unworthy. And you're going to listen to that all day. And then it's going to, then the robot is going to say, I need to go to bed because I am unworthy. And we're going to say, but there's no self in you. You don't have a self to be unworthy. But it's created, it says, yes, there is. I am really unworthy. I'm really sad and depressed, and I have to go to bed. But we'd say, but we've programmed you. And so it's to see that is what we're doing. We're listening to a program that is telling us, I am this, I am that. But if you can think of a robot that you've put together, so if you've had children and we have children, and then they come to us and they say, I am unworthy, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. You can just see how they're believing something that's not true, but it's impossible for you to get that message across to them. It's impossible for them to hear it because they're listening to something that is telling them that, and it creates a self. It creates this idea that there's something here to be unworthy. So you could go to the robot and you could say, why do you feel unworthy? And he might point to his skin that you've put on there. You've attached some flesh that you've grown in a laboratory and plastered it. And you might even grown some eyeballs. And you might say, why do you feel so bad? And he might point to his eyeballs and say, I'm bad because I have a program that says brown eyes are bad and blue eyes are good or something, or my skin, you put white skin here or black skin here. And it points to parts of what you've put on it. So you've created this robot, you've stuck some skin on there, stuck some eyeballs and programmed something into it. And you can see there is no self there. There's nothing there. It's empty. It's empty of any programming. You're the one that's put it in. So you just say, hang on a minute, I'll remove that program. You know, that program that I put on the other day, and it just repeats, you are useless. So it creates a self by those thoughts create a self. And you say, but robot, you don't actually have a self. You're created. You're just something that's been made up. You're not really that flesh. I put that there. And if you can start to see, imagine that robot saying to you, no, I'm terrible because I have this particular bit of skin that's doing this. It's got a wrinkle in it. I've got a wrinkle in my skin here. I just can't cope with that wrinkle. It means this. And you say, hang on a minute, I'll just iron that wrinkle out. Will that make you feel better? But then it finds something else. So it's identifying with its skin, with its hair, with its eyes. It makes a big meaning about it. And it creates this self that's unworthy. I'm not worthy. I can't go out. I'm not as good as the other robots. I'm not as good. Look at that robot next door. You know, the robot that the neighbours have. Its skin. Why did they make it with that skin? That's got much nicer skin than me. And you say, look, you're just making a meaning of something that's not important. It's, no. See, sometimes you use analogy helped me to really see what I'm doing to myself. This is what I do. This is what the ego does. So take away that programming and put some new programming, and just say, imagine if we got our little robot and just said, okay, here's your new thought system. I am love, I'm happy, I'm free. This outer coating that my owner put on me means nothing. It doesn't define me. It's just like the clothes I wear. It's nothing. It has no meaning. And this is how we have to start thinking of ourselves. That this coating, this bit of flesh, he calls it the wall of flesh, the eyeballs, the hair, it means nothing. There's no meaning. So you might even think that, to undo this, it might, that this is not what my parents made of me, that, I came in and I got this wall of flesh and I got these eyeballs and this hair, and it means nothing. It's no better or worse than anybody else. It's just the bodies are nothing. So this little robot that we have, that we've created, we start to see it starts off empty. And that's how he says we start. He says we make a self-concept as we go along. And that self-concept comes from others. So the others are, the people around us, our school teachers, our friends, everybody that says something to us, we are making a self-concept out of, which is the ego self-concept. And so if you look at, say, your little computer, your little robot went out and visited somebody and it came back and it said, I've got to go to bed, that neighbour. I went to the neighbours and the neighbour said that I'm not good enough, that I'll never do enough chores to be good enough. I'll never do enough, no matter what I do, no matter how I serve you, no matter how many times I vacuum your floor and do your dishes, I'll never be good enough. I've got to go to bed. I've got to give up. And have you got some antidepressants to take away this belief? And you just say, well, it doesn't matter what you do. You know, just vacuuming the floor or washing my dishes doesn't define you. You don't have to do those things to be who you are. Who you are is just automatically perfect and whole. And it says, no, I can't listen to you. I'm defined by what my little robot hands and robot feet do. And you're laughing and you're saying, how could you believe that? How could you believe that what your little robot arms and robot legs do and where you go and how much money you earn would define you? They're just things that your little robot body does. But it's created, the robot is starting to create a self-concept. It's listening to others and it creates a self. And it says, myself feels very upset by what you just said. And you say, but you don't have a self. You're a robot. There's no self to be upset. You're a bit of metal and I stuck some flesh on you. You're nothing. You don't exist, actually. You actually don't exist at all. And it's, I do. I know I exist because I feel upset. Why do you feel upset? What are your beliefs? That I'm unworthy. Okay. So the self is created from the belief of unworthiness. It has to. If I think I'm unworthy, there has to be something. But is there something, or is it just a belief in unworthiness? Is that all there is? A belief in unworthiness. And when that belief goes, there's no self. There's no separate self. There's a false, this is all a big crazy ruse. You can see it in the little robot, that it thinks it has a self that can be unworthy. But you can see, look up, but you're a robot. I created you. So this is an analogy of what we do. We create this self-concept by our beliefs. The beliefs create. There's no separate self. It's created by its beliefs. So undo your beliefs and the separate self, the self-concept disappears because it's not a real thing. There's no self here to be anything. So you look at your little robot and you say, but you don't have a self. You were empty. You were just an empty thing when you started. And that's it. But when I talk about the emptiness, we don't go back to emptiness. We go back to, when we undo the beliefs, we get back to empty of those beliefs. But what happens from that is we enter the all-encompassing love. So love is what we are. So the analogy of the robot is really just to be able for you to see something, to get you to, you might just have a realization, as I'm just sharing about this. You might see what you're doing. There might be some, just because the mind that gets these realization, it's just like a little aha moment can happen and you go, oh my God, I see it. I see what I'm doing to myself. I see it. And even if you haven't had an aha moment from this, it doesn't matter. It'll come in. It really will. It'll come in. You'll see that thoughts think you. You don't have thoughts. There's no you to have a thought. There's just thoughts that come in and then I believe them and I don't have to. I'm the observer of the thoughts. I can watch the thoughts going through all day. I never have to attach to a thought. I have the power to just watch them as a procession going by in my mind. I don't have to believe one of those thoughts. They're not my thoughts. Because if they were my thoughts, I would be saying, okay, now I'm going to have this thought, and then I'd have it. But we see the thoughts come in and they think me. I don't know what my thoughts are going to be. So what? They're not mine. They can't be mine. That proves they're not mine. We're looking at evidence. We're looking at our mind. We're contemplating the nature of our mind. We have to go in and contemplate and look at it. I'm not choosing my thoughts. They're choosing me. And those thoughts aren't my friend. Those ego thoughts don't. They're not friendly. So let's get on to our forgiveness process here, which is how we get freedom. So I'm just going to pause the recording. So just finish with a 10-minute silent meditation. I've just put the recording back on. Oh. So, yeah. So I've just turned the recording back on. Just really give thanks to the Holy Spirit for using the group to enlighten us, shift our perception. We cannot even know what's going on in our minds, how our spirit is using the group, our daily lives, everything. It's happening. And what we think of our retreats are sometimes our biggest advances. And sometimes what we think of our biggest advances are retreats. We cannot know anything. We cannot judge anything. We have to remain in the I don't know mind. I don't know how I'm going to view this differently. I'm not going to know how I'm going to awaken. I don't know. I don't know when. I don't know how. But my job is to just turn up each day and put the Holy Spirit in charge and do my lessons as He has guided. Follow His guidance. Join with God in the morning. Sit quietly and join with God and feel that love. Practice that until it becomes something that is bringing me the experience. So thank you, Holy Spirit, for doing your job. Thank you for being the answer and always just being there, ready to bring an answer in whenever I need it. Now, my job is to choose to invite you in. Just invite you. I want your answer. I want to know how you see this. I want to know how you see me. I want to know how you see others. Because whatever I've decided for myself has brought me deep unhappiness, agitation, frustration, irritation, annoyance, all states of being that are not joy. So I see when I think with the ego, that's the outcome. And luckily for us, we know there is another way. And all I need to do is to open to it, invite it in, and welcome it. Just welcome it. I want your way. I don't want this. I don't want how I feel. I want your way. Your way brings peace. And thanks, Holy Spirit, for using our group and bringing us together and giving us the inspired idea to do this group, giving us the inspired idea of each day of what to say, everyone to share what they're sharing. And it is being used for the higher good. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next week, and Annie will do the group on the weekend. I love you, I bless you, and I honour you.
Bless you, Cate. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Have a blessed day.
Bye, everyone.